Welcome to the Midwest LaRouche Organization conference meeting, and I'm Stewart Battle, and I'm gonna just kind of open things up here real quick, then turn it over to our guest Gretchen. We have a number of things to talk about tonight, but I will start with the something I want to talk about before anything else is that we have put out a very important press release earlier in the day today. Let me pull it up. Actually, you know what I can do? I can screen share. And it is titled, let's see if I can get that away. Why LaRouche PAC no longer represents the policies of Lyndon LaRouche, which was authored today by Helga Zepp LaRouche. We will post this in the chat so people can read it on their own when they have a minute, maybe after the call. But this is something people may have heard about, but we've had some very rogue elements who've taken over the LaRouche PAC organization and LaRouche PAC website, very much in a different direction to not only what Helga LaRouche and the rest of the organization represents, but which is very radically different from the direction Lyndon LaRouche himself was originally taking this organization. And so we're going all out to make this public and to spread it far and wide, internationally and in as many languages as possible. Because it is an issue at this point, as people who are getting on this call no doubtedly know, that we're in a civilizational crisis. We don't have a guarantee of victory whatsoever. We are in a very much a real civilizational epochal crisis, not just because of the internal American political struggle, but because of very real push for fascism in the name of a great reset internationally. And the question of strategy, the question of how an organization such as ours goes about winning this fight or waging this fight is absolutely crucial. So we can maybe talk more about that. I just wanted to raise it because it's obviously a very important subject. But in regards to Lyndon LaRouche, what's important to point out is that LaRouche was hated by what some people may call the globalists, which much more precisely is the system of an internationally extended British Empire. LaRouche was hated by them precisely because he knew how to defeat them. It wasn't just that he disliked them or said dirty things about them or knew a few of their tricks and was popular. That was not the case. It was that Lyndon LaRouche knew and still has elaborated the principles of which the enemies of mankind can be defeated and a system of functional sovereign nation states can be elaborated and developed upon, which really is a question of, as LaRouche fought for many years, a new economic order, a new economic order to replace the bankrupt system that still exists, which we're still bailing out, including during the Trump administration. That bubble was never stopped from bubbling. He never was able to rein in the forces that are still driving the global financial the insanity which is the global financial system from exploding. So the LaRouche organization is playing an absolutely crucial role. One of which things we're going to discuss tonight and get into briefly is the question of more of this Great Reset, more of the special report that's been released that we've just put out. And I don't want to say too much. I'm already going to start going too much here, but what just happened last week in Texas shows us that the policies of the Green New Deal are a failure as far as the universe is concerned. And it was a proof. It was a proof that we have to rethink our approach. When you had windmills freezing and solar panels obviously not functioning, and they were windmills that froze. It wasn't just coal and natural gas. The bulk of it was the windmills. But the question is, who was to blame? And it's very easy, as many people on this call might know, it's very easy to blame the greenies, who the tree-hugging greenies, who are good scapegoats for everything. They're an easy target. But did you know that the windmills in Texas were built almost exclusively by bigwig Republicans, including the Bushes, including Rick Perry, when he was governor? And then at the same time, you had a massive privatization. Talk about one of the big, babies of the fiscal conservative movement. There was a mass rush to privatize the energy infrastructure in Texas, which was the other side of the coin in allowing for massive blackouts, and exactly what we warned about, which was genocide, which was the leaving of the population vulnerable to nature, to an actual crisis that requires human intervention. So the reason I'm saying this is because you have to know what you're dealing with. You have to know history as it's developed up until today if you're going to successfully know what to do to defeat it. And that's something that if somebody thinks they're going to blame the socialists or blame the crazy liberal greenies without acknowledging the much more expansive and evil nature of this apparatus, which has infected almost the entirety of the political spectrum in the United States, then you have to know what it is if you're going to actually be an effective force. So what I'd like to do real quick, just to kind of introduce that, is I'd like to play a short clip from Mr. LaRouche, which I think will further give an idea of what I'm saying, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen. So let's see if I can do this. Oh, we have to make sure. Okay. Can people see this?
Yep.
Okay, great.
As a very poor fellow who did not believe he could think. The function of education is to make the most important of these ideas of physical principle, ideas of classical art, to make these the personal property of a developing young mind. So that the young mind coming out of an educational process and out of the life experience of growing up becomes an adult person who in that degree and sense embodies all of history before them for generations and generations and generations. And by direct knowledge, that is by replication of discoveries, they know much about history. They know the names of discoverers. The inner mind of Plato is more familiar to them than the bum who's walking across the street. They know him better. They have a closer relationship to Plato than that poor bum, that poor penner. That is history. Is to see yourself, to see the past, to see the future as this kind of continuing process. People who don't know history are called slaves. They're slaves in literal sense, or they are kept like animals, not knowing where they came from and not knowing where their children are going. They have no control over their own lives, control over their own nation. They are meaningless, existentialist wanderers in a post-industrial nightmare, a postmodernist nightmare. And that's what's been destroyed. The character, the essential moral character of populations has been systematically destroyed by what came out of the Frankfurt School and what the Frankfurt School came out of. By the baby boomer culture of the 1960s and what has followed, especially is typified by the destruction of science, by the destruction of technological progress, and by the destruction, above all, of education and morality.
Okay. So hopefully that was clear. So our goal, just to say, our goal here is to not be slaves, as Mr. LaRouche identified it. Our goal is to actually be up to the challenge, to know not just what to do, but the historic process that's led us to this point, such that we can defeat this thing and actually have a future for mankind. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Gretchen Small.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. I live in Virginia, worked with the LaRouche movement since I was in college. It's what I've done with my life, and it's been wonderful. So just so that introduction. And did some of the work, so people know, organizing south of the border, which gives a kind of international perspective, which I think, as you'll see when you read the statement on why the LaRouche organization, the LaRouche PAC does not no longer represents the LaRouche movement, you'll see that that's really a key element here, because we're not going to get out of this on our own as the United States. The problems that we face didn't come from the United States. They're not located in the United States. We have a human problem that we have to solve. What I think in terms of what's on our minds as Americans, because all of us here are, is, here we've just had this incredible thing of adding the most advanced rover yet onto the surface of Mars. It's carrying a helicopter. It's going to be the first time they have flight, we hope, on Mars. It's joining United Arab Emirates, China, the European Space Agency, who are all have orbiters. Hopefully some rover, the Chinese rover will land successfully also. It's in Curiosity, which was landed, I think, in 2012. It was supposed to end 2 years later, and it's still chugging away and doing Mars work. There's another lander that I had completely forgotten. I think it's called InSight, that's doing seismic readings. Mars. When this thing landed, for me, read all in stuff on colonizing Mars and the moon, I suddenly realized that it suddenly hit me. We're in Mars exploration seriously now. This is the big time. We don't have human beings there. We're not close to that, but we've got lots of activity there. And that is really tremendous. And at the same time, I think we're worried. You could say many people are worried, and we are worried. I'm worried. Will we have a country? The United States of America, will we be able to keep it as what it was designed to be, what it has been through much of its existence, and what the world needs it to be? So what I was thinking, using the Great Reset report tonight, is to pose a few, to put on the agenda what we should discuss is how we got to this point. What are we up against? Because people, as Stewart was saying, people underestimate that, I think. And flowing from that, what we can do about it. And I don't intend to give you an answer, because I don't think this is necessarily an answer, but to put some ideas on the table to those questions, which will get our thought processes going. And we could pick it up in the discussion then more on that. Just to start with the Great Reset report itself. I hope, I don't know, you don't have your hands up. I don't know how many of you have read it. I don't know how many of you have read all of it. I recommend people read this Great Leap Backward report that EIR has just written on the Great Reset, cover to cover, because it's not a series of different things. When you go through what they intend for electricity, no electricity. What they intend for food, no food, and I'll come back to that. What they intend for population, what they intend for this, mixed in with what LaRouche's whole point of this is completely unnecessary, because we're human beings, and human beings are not like any animal species. We are distinct from the animals by our capability to hypothesize that which we cannot see, touch, feel, or anything, to hypothesize how this universe works, and to intervene on it, to design technologies to take advantage of these laws, and to organize our societies for this constant improvement and advancement of human beings' relationship to the universe and expand. That's who we are. What is the Great Leap Backward goes through, you get a sense of what the enemy's mentality is, what their view of man is. And I think the effect of reading through it all and thinking through it is not even the facts or the figures, but to kind of get an idea that this is an existential fight for us, and we get an idea of the oligarchical mentality. This is above a Biden. This is even above a John Kerry. It is an idea that we put out the report in order to get people to understand that there's a basis for a global cooperation to resolve, to crush it, and to replace it with a human economy based on that concept that Lynn always based everything he ever did in his life on, what Lyndon LaRouche did. That's what he based it on. A pretty wild thing. I mean, when you're talking about a project which is now operational to reduce electricity use worldwide, when you're talking about which will end the industrial industrial civilization. You're talking about a program, and this I'll just mention some facts and figures and the outlook of this for those that might not have read it, and because I think it's pretty stunning, is what they plan to do in food, and which they're very explicit on. It starts from the premise that people are the threat to the planet. And it's openly stated in that case. And you'll read through in this report, it comes from the royal family of Britain, with a few other royals stuck in. It comes from their hangers-on, but this comes from the very top, from Prince Philip, who founded the World Wildlife Foundation. And as a branch of that, something they first called the Primitive Peoples Fund. And then they decided that sounded a little too colonial, so they named it the Survival International, but an organization dedicated to defending primitivism. In other words, tribes in total backwardness, so they all die at age 19, which is the average age, I think, of lifespan of the Yanomami in Brazil, which are held up as one of these people to be protected. And these are protected not as part of the human species, but as part of a different species, as an animal. And so in this, we were looking at, they were putting together, I found on the site of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, that's founded by the Queen. Its patron is the Queen of England. A report on February 3rd on how to eliminate and the necessity of eliminating modern agriculture worldwide. Because agriculture, you'll be unhappy to know, by the means by which we eat, is taking the number one cause of loss of biodiversity. So that, and because human beings, there being quite a few more of us since 1600 because of the Industrial Revolution and the leaps in energy that we've had. And we have taken 5.5 times more agricultural land to produce food for people, and we're doing it cheaply. And the policy actually said of this report they call themselves Chatham House, but I think it's better to call them by the Royal Institute of International Affairs because it sticks in who it comes from. And they actually say that the problem is there has been an increase in consumption of calories. It's an increase in the price of food has dropped, and that has to be stopped. And they give 3 different methods to do that. The first being to change dietary patterns around the world. That means to reduce the overconsumption of calories. That means, in particular, no meat. I mean, no meat. They are not even less meat. They're for the no meat faction. And they actually said, for those who haven't read it, you have to know, for Americans, if we switch from beef to beans in the diets of the entire US population, none of you get a hamburger, never mind a steak, right? Never mind a lamb chop. That would free up 42% of US cropland for other uses, such as ecosystem restoration or more nature-friendly farming, by which they mean no fertilizer, and they're specific about this, much less fertilizer, much less pesticide, much less mechanization. You're going to have back-breaking labor in the old days before we modernized agriculture. And we will have a lot less food. And this will be enforced by cutting off credit, any finance for any productive farmer. And the thing about this is it's already happening. There's an other article in this report which lays out how the European Union has adopted essentially this policy and is putting it in for the next 10 years to put this policy into effect. It's called the Farm to Fork program of the European Union. You can read that there. We've had reports this week alone from farmers around the country and people who've heard that are being offered lower interest rates if they take loans to cut their production of farming and to put it into land, biodiverse land, because this report says you've got to have a significant set aside of land out of farming and into the wild, for whatever. So this is a 2-tier credit system against production. It's exactly the wrong thing. And the results of this is the kind of thing this is the thought process that went into, and they're very serious about carrying out. This is what world finance is being reshaped to impose upon nations around the world. And if you think about the enormity of what is being proposed and implemented, and then you look at what happened in Texas, as Stewart was mentioning, when you have no electricity, it doesn't just mean you don't have heating for your home. It doesn't just mean that you don't have an internet and your lives are threatened from the standpoint that you could freeze to death. It also means there's as you've seen, no electricity, which then creates water problems because the pipes burst, the water treatment plants break down. So therefore people are without water. And then the other factor is that we nationally will have an effect on our food prices, because the farm production was obviously hurt by no electricity. So you had farmers dumping millions of pounds of milk because it couldn't process it, because there was no electricity to run the plants. This, in the Texas case, it was relatively shortly defined, a short period, if you want to call it that. We've come back, we'll do some things about it, although there are a bunch of idiot Republicans who, like Representative McCall, I believe it was, I heard him driving an amazing statement. What are you going to do about the fact that some people received $11,000 as a bill for 1 week's worth of electricity? And he said, don't worry about it. The federal government have made us declared a disaster emergency, and the federal government is going to pay those bills. Instead of wiping it out, instead of simply saying that's speculation, that the market, the running of the Texas market of electricity on this Enron model led to speculative, usurious prices, which simply should be written off, because these electricity producers are being paid to not produce electricity effectively by these subsidies. And so you have, but that's a future. If you get this across the board, this is really going to be the way life is. Now, you'll see in the report, and many of you may have heard or whatever, the discussion that this is Malthusianism, that behind this is the thought that of a work of a man named Thomas Malthus. Now, Thomas Malthus worked for the British East India Company. He worked for the empire. He was hired by the empire. He wrote for the empire, and he did the empire. Many people think they know about him, but I wanted to pull out some quotes on what he actually has said, what his philosophy is, because you'll see this is actually permeated into our own anti-government, so-called conservative movement. So this is from Thomas Malthus' essay on the principle of population. We are bound in justice and honor formally to disdain the right of the poor to support. And he then lays out some regulations where we're, laws where we would not support any of the poor as a law. You couldn't do it. The infant is, he said, comparatively speaking, of little value to society, as others will immediately supply its place. All children who are born beyond what would be required to keep up the population to a desired level must necessarily perish, unless room be made for them by the death of grown persons. Therefore, we should facilitate, instead of foolishly and vainly endeavoring to impede, the operations of nature in producing this mortality. And if we dread the too frequent visitation of the horrid form of famine, we should sedulously encourage the other forms of destruction, which we compelled nature to use. And then he goes on to say we should not recommend cleanliness to the poor. We should make their streets narrower, crowd more people into homes, court the return of the plague, quote, Thomas Malthus. And we should, above all, refuse specific remedies for ravaging diseases and restrain those benevolent but much mistaken men who have thought they are doing a service to mankind by protecting schemes for the total extirpation of particular disorders, meaning diseases. So that's the viewpoint of the organizers of this top-down, would-be top-down control of credit of all policy in the world in order to end modern agriculture and modern industry, which have allowed almost 8 billion people to live on the earth, and it would necessarily drop it down to somewhere under 1 billion people. Now let me read you keeping in mind what Malthus said, one child is of no significance. Any infant born is of no significance. This is from someone in Texas. You may have heard some of it, but okay. No one owes you or your family anything. This is Texas from within the middle of the Texas breakdown. No electricity, no water, people, freezing to death. It is not the local government's responsibility to support you during trying times like this. Sink or swim, it's your choice. The city and the county, along with power providers or any other service, owes you nothing. I'm sick and tired of people looking for a damn handout. If you don't have electricity, you step up and come up with a game plan to help your family, keep your family warm and safe. I'll come back to that. If you have no water, you deal with it and think outside the box to survive and supply water to your family. If you're sitting at home in the cold because you have no power and are sitting there waiting for someone to come rescue you because you're lazy, is the direct result of your being how you were raised. Only the strong will survive, and the weak will perish. This is sadly, folks, God has given us the tools to support ourselves in times like this. This is sadly a product of a socialist government where they feed people to believe that few will work and others will become dependent for handouts. Now that is exactly what Thomas Malthus was proposing. And that was written by a mayor of the town of Colorado in Texas, who was forced to resign over expressing this simple statement that societies are not organized for general progress and advancement, as Lyndon LaRouche has always advocated, and not formed, as the Declaration of Independence says, in order to form a more government to provide for the common welfare. Now I think the question is how we got to this point, because we are the country that just did the rover, and we at the same time the country which is facing this problem, and where we really have to pull something together to stop this green reset. And how did we get to this? And with this I want to end, but this comes back to what Stewart was talking about in terms of the beginning, on the opening statement of what the difference is between the LaRouche organization strategy and why the LaRouche PAC strategy is absolutely going to fail and is totally opposed to what Lyndon LaRouche ever talked about. And Lyndon got at this in a 1982 paper called The Toynbee Factor in British Grand Strategy. Toynbee was the head of a British Secret Service during World War I, and he understood. Lynn said, I could have called this the manipulation of culture as a method of warfare, but he decided to really put the point on Toynbee and the British intelligence. And in this paper, he holds the American people responsible, not just the Kissingers, for the fact that all official Washington, as he wrote, are down on all fours bowing before the British embassy. And he said, the problem is for the American people, they don't understand the world outside our borders. It's a Walt Disney life-size reproduction of pictures and descriptions in a collection of travel folders. The real life of nations and peoples abroad is not real for us. They are objects of our fantasy lives. And he said, and this is related to what Stewart said, and history, most Americans have the same view of it. It's a fantasy, they don't understand it. And he said, he actually blames soap operas in great part. He discusses soap opera as one of the key means by which this change in the American character from being knowing that our country was to advance ourselves in order to advance the whole human race, it came about through getting people to look inward, to consider only themselves. And he said that's the essence of the problem in the political process in the electorate today. Fiscal policy, the Tim Boyds of this world, the Malthusians, all of this. He locates in this turn away from what we used to have, where a family was where people would gain the strength, where then they could go out and have the strength to fix the problems of the world. And Lynn wrote, and with this I'll end and we should then discuss, to the extent that our citizens are estranged from mankind, from the notion of our highest national purpose to advance civilization as a whole, and worse, narrowed in their consciousness in the way illustrated by the behavioral modification effects of soap opera, they cut themselves off from the good and stultify that very attribute in themselves which reflects the divine. So let's take it from there.